For 30 years, my voice was a carefully curated instrument. It was precise, professional, and quiet. It delivered lectures on post-colonial theory and offered measured critiques in department meetings. It was a voice designed never to offend, never to sound angry, never to be too much. I thought that was the price of admission, the price of respect. Then came the day I sat at my own desk, in my own office, surrounded by my own books, and I opened my mouth to speak, and nothing came out. The silence was absolute. My carefully curated voice was gone, stolen.
That chilling silence was the beginning of a roar that would shake an institution to its core. Welcome to Unbroken Women. I'm your host, Susan Bentley. Today, we are honored to share the powerful testimony of Dr. Kiana Williams, a brilliant academic from Washington, D.C., who was pushed to her breaking point and discovered that her greatest power was the very voice they tried so desperately to take. Her story is a testament to the fact that true dignity isn't found in silence, but in speaking truth to power.
My world smelled like old paper and chalk dust. It was a world of tweed blazers, worn leather armchairs, and the satisfying heft of a well-researched book. Academia was my sanctuary. I loved the rhythm of the semester, the eager faces of my students, the quiet hum of the library late at night. I was Dr. Kiana Williams, respected, published, tenured. I had built a life, a career, brick by painstaking brick, in a world that wasn't always designed for me. I knew the unwritten rules. As a Black woman in a predominantly white male institution, you had to be twice as good to get half as far. You had to be impeccable. Your arguments had to be ironclad, your professionalism unimpeachable, your emotions kept under a tight, disciplined lock. I mastered the art of being non-threateningly brilliant. I navigated the faculty lounge like a diplomat, smiling politely when my ideas were ignored, only to be repeated 5 minutes later by a male colleague and hailed as genius. I held my tongue when I was mistaken for an assistant for the 3rd time in a week. This was just the weather. You don't complain about the rain, you just learn to carry a very sturdy umbrella. My dream was simple: to contribute, to teach, to write things that mattered. And for a long time, I believed I was doing just that, comfortably existing within the hallowed, ivy-covered walls. But that sturdy umbrella gets heavy. The weight wasn't from one single event. It was the accumulated pressure of 1,000 tiny cuts. It was the constant, low-grade exhaustion of self-monitoring. Every email had to be perfectly phrased. Every comment in a meeting had to be carefully calibrated. I was performing a version of myself I thought they could accept. It was a constant performance of agreeable competence. I felt like I was shrinking, my edges being sanded down to fit into a space that was just a little too small. The weight was the invisibility. It was pouring my soul into my research, only to have it treated with polite disinterest. It was mentoring students who then be scooped up and championed by senior male faculty, their connection to me quietly erased. It was a slow, insidious theft of intellectual and emotional energy that no one else could see. On the outside, I was a success story. On the inside, I was carrying the leaden weight of being perpetually underestimated and overlooked. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. I remember the weak afternoon light filtering through the dusty blinds of my office. I was reading a dissertation proposal from a brilliant young woman, a student of mine. Her writing was fierce, unapologetic, and in the margins she had written a note to herself: "Don't let them water this down." The phrase snagged on my heart. I looked up from her paper at the rows of my own published works on the shelf. Accomplishments, proof of my worth. But in that moment, I had to ask myself,
How much of my own work had I watered down? How many sharp edges had I smoothed over to make my ideas more palatable? I thought about the arguments I'd abandoned, the bold theories I'd softened, the passion I had tempered with caution. A cold wave washed over me. I saw a future stretching out ahead, filled with more of the same. More careful words, more polite smiles, more quiet compromises. For the first time, that future didn't look like a sanctuary. It looked like a cage. The cage door was blown off its hinges at a conference in Chicago. I had just completed a research paper that was the culmination of 5 years of work. It was my magnum opus, a piece of scholarship that I felt deep in my bones was groundbreaking. I had shared early drafts with a senior colleague, Dr. Alistair Finch, a man I considered a mentor, seeking his feedback. He'd been effusive in his praise. I was scheduled to present my findings later that year. But there, in a cavernous hotel ballroom, Alistair was at the podium for the keynote address. The title on the screen behind him was a slight variation of my own. I felt a prickle of confusion. Then he began to speak, and the words coming out of his mouth were my words, my analysis, my data, my conclusions. He was presenting my entire paper, my 5 years of labor, as his own. Slide after slide, my life's work flashed before my eyes, attributed to him. I sat frozen in my seat, my blood turning to ice. The room was filled with hundreds of my peers, the giants of my field. They were nodding, taking notes, impressed. And when he finished, they gave him a standing ovation. The sound of their applause was a physical assault. It felt like waves of dirt being shoveled onto my face. In that moment, I wasn't Dr. Williams. I wasn't a respected academic. I was nothing. I had been completely and utterly erased. The flight back to D.C. is a blur. I remember staring out the window at the clouds, trying to find some other explanation. A misunderstanding. A terrible, colossal coincidence. My mind raced, creating elaborate scenarios where this wasn't what it so clearly was. Maybe he was co-presenting and forgot to mention my name. Maybe he thought I had given him permission. But I knew. The denial was a thin, flimsy shield against the horror. Then came the fear. It was a cold, constricting thing that settled deep in my gut. What could I even do? Accuse Alistair Finch? A giant in our field. A man with impeccable connections. The university's golden boy. They would never believe me. I could hear their voices already. Kiana is being emotional. She's oversensitive. Perhaps she's mistaken. They would call me hysterical, difficult, an angry black woman. They would question my memory, my integrity, my sanity. My entire career, the life I had so carefully constructed, felt like a house of cards. One accusation, one wrong move, and it would all come tumbling down. I'd be a pariah. The fear was paralyzing. It whispered to me at night, telling me to stay silent, to forget it, to swallow the injustice, just as I had swallowed 1,000 smaller ones before. After all, what was one more? A week later, I tried to go back to normal. I walked into my office, sat at my desk, and pulled up the syllabus for my graduate seminar. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I needed to write an email to my students about their upcoming assignments. Simple, routine. But the words wouldn't come. It wasn't writer's block. It was something deeper. A fundamental disconnect between my brain and my hands. A chasm had opened up inside me. The rage I had been suppressing. The profound sense of violation. It wasn't just an emotion anymore.
It had become a physical presence. It was a thick, suffocating fog that filled my lungs and choked off all thought. I looked at the books on my shelves, the tools of my trade, and they felt like props on a stage. It was all a lie. My voice, the one thing that was truly mine, the vessel for my intellect, my passion, my soul, had been so thoroughly stolen that I could no longer access it myself. I just sat there, in the crushing silence of my office, for hours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply ceased to be. The quiet, compliant, professional Dr. Williams had finally, completely broken.
In the depths of that silence, a new sound began to emerge. It wasn't a voice. It was a single, cold, hard point of clarity. I could let this break me. I could resign, retreat, and let Alistair Finch have my work, my career, my voice. Or I could fight. The thought was terrifying. It felt like stepping off a cliff into a storm. It meant betraying the unspoken rule I had lived by my entire life: do not make waves. It meant becoming the difficult, angry woman they were so ready to label me as. It meant risking everything: my reputation, my livelihood, my carefully constructed sanctuary. But the alternative, to live out the rest of my days in that suffocating silence, to be haunted by the ghost of the woman I could have been, that was no longer an option. It was a choice between professional death and spiritual death. And in that moment, I chose to live. I would not be erased. I would make them hear me. My first step wasn't a grand confrontation. It was quiet, meticulous, and fueled by a cold, righteous anger. I went home, and instead of despairing, I opened my laptop. I started a new folder on my desktop, and I named it Evidence. I went through years of emails, finding every message I had sent to Alistair with drafts of my paper attached. I saved the metadata, the timestamps. I pulled up my original research notes, my scribbled outlines, my raw data files, all timestamped, all undeniably mine. Each document I saved felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The printer whirred for hours, spitting out page after page of proof. The growing stack of paper on my dining room table wasn't just evidence, it was an arsenal. I felt a strange duality. My hands were trembling with a profound fear of the war I was about to start, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. This was the first time I wasn't asking for permission or seeking approval. I was simply building my case, preparing my truth for battle. It was the first act of my own liberation. The resistance was immediate and brutal. I filed a formal complaint of academic misconduct with the university. The first meeting with the dean was a masterclass in institutional gaslighting. He peered at me over his glasses, suggesting it was all a terrible misunderstanding. He spoke of Alistair's stellar reputation, the university's image, and the collaborative nature of academic work. My meticulously organized binder evidence sat on the table between us, untouched. The message was clear: drop this. The walls of the university, which I once saw as a sanctuary, now felt like they were closing in. Colleagues I had shared lunch with for 20 years suddenly became very busy when they saw me in the hallway. My classes were scrutinized. Anonymous comments began appearing on online faculty forums, questioning my scholarship and my agenda. The institution wasn't just protecting Alistair, it was actively trying to crush me. They were painting me as unstable, vindictive, a threat. The smear campaign was subtle but vicious. It was designed to isolate me, to make me doubt my own reality, and it was working.
I felt like I was screaming in a soundproof room. They weren't just denying my claim, they were denying my very existence, my right to have a grievance. The system I had dedicated my life to was turning all of its power against me. The loneliness was the hardest part. At night, the house would be silent, and the doubts would creep in, loud and insistent. "You've ruined everything," they'd whisper. "You should have just stayed quiet." I would lie awake, replaying every dismissive conversation, every averted gaze. I missed the simple comfort of my old life, even the parts that had been suffocating. The familiar pain was at least predictable. This new pain was a wild, unknown territory. I felt utterly lost, questioning my decision 100 times a day. Was I strong enough for this? Was one paper, one injustice, worth tearing my entire world apart? The mental exhaustion was profound. It took every ounce of my energy just to get out of bed, to put on my professional armor, and to face another day of being an outcast in my own home. I was fighting a war on two fronts, one against the institution and a far more brutal one against the fear and doubt inside my own head. The knockout blow came in a crisp, white, university-branded envelope. It was the official response to my complaint. I opened it with trembling hands. The words blurred together, but the message was stark. After a thorough review, we have found insufficient evidence to proceed. Insufficient evidence. My binder was 3 inches thick. But it got worse. The final paragraph was a thinly veiled threat, mentioning a formal review of my own unprofessional conduct and the damage I was causing to the department's reputation. That was it. I had lost. They hadn't just ignored me. They had turned me into the villain. I remember sitting in my car in the faculty parking lot, holding that letter, and a kind of terrible peace washed over me. The fight was gone. I had nothing left. They had won. They had successfully silenced me. I thought about packing up my office, submitting my resignation, and just disappearing. The thought of walking back into that building, of facing their smug, victorious faces, was more than I could bear. I was done. I was completely and utterly defeated. I went to my office that evening to start packing my books into boxes. It felt like a funeral. As I was taking down a framed print, there was a soft knock on the door. 3 of my female graduate students stood there, their faces etched with concern. One of them, the young woman whose dissertation I'd been reading, stepped forward. "Dr. Williams," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "We heard what the committee decided, and we just wanted to tell you, we believe you." Then, another student spoke up. "Dr. Finch, he did something similar to my research proposal last year. I was too scared to say anything." The third one nodded, her eyes welling up. "He's done it to others, too." In that moment, something inside me shifted. Their words were a spark in the suffocating darkness. I looked at their faces, so young, so bright, so full of the same fire I once had, and I realized this was no longer just about my paper. It was about them. It was about every woman who had ever been silenced, diminished, or erased. My fight wasn't just my own. It was theirs too. That night, my office became a war room. We were no longer victims. We were a unit. The students helped me find a tenacious pro bono lawyer who specialized in academic misconduct and wasn't afraid of the university. She looked at my binder, then listened to the students' stories, and a grim, determined smile touched her lips. "Oh, they have a problem," she said. We worked tirelessly. We gathered signed affidavits from the students, documenting a pattern of behavior. We began to set boundaries. I started responding to the university's threatening emails with 2 simple words: forwarded to my counsel. The fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a powerful sense of purpose. The bravest step was contacting an investigative journalist from a national paper. Telling my story to a stranger, laying my vulnerability bare for the world to see, was terrifying. But as I spoke, I felt my own strength returning, word by word. I wasn't just climbing back, I was rising. When the newspaper article broke, the story exploded. The university, faced with a public relations nightmare and irrefutable evidence, was finally forced to act. There were investigations, depositions, and eventually consequences for Alistair. But my real victory wasn't in his downfall. It was in my own resurrection. I remember standing before a university oversight, and my voice, it was different. It wasn't loud, but it was solid. It didn't tremble. It was calm, clear, and unshakable. I was no longer performing dignity. I embodied it. I was no longer asking for their belief. I was stating my truth. In that moment, I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. I had found my own. I had shed the weight of their expectations and emerged as myself, whole and unbroken. If I could speak to the woman I was, the one who measured her words and shrank to fit, I would tell her this: I see you. I see your quiet strength and your silent endurance. I forgive you for the times you held your tongue to keep the peace. You were not weak. You were surviving. But I also want you to know something. Your voice is not a whisper. It is a roar. Let them hear you, even if they try to silence you. For your truth will always rise from the ashes.
Thank you, Dr. Kiana Williams, for sharing your incredible story of courage and resilience. Your voice is truly a force and a reminder that one person's truth can ignite a movement. What part of Kiana's journey resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe to Unbroken Women for more stories of triumph, and click here to watch another testimony from a woman who found her power in the face of adversity. Until next time, be well.